Good afternoon. Are we good in the back? Okay, we've got audio and visual. Good afternoon. It is 1:30 and you are attending a Wausau Waterworks Commission meeting. And with a quorum present, we're ready to get underway with item 1 to approve the minutes of April 10th, 2024 meeting. I would entertain a motion, or we have some commentary on meeting minutes. Mr. Robinson.
Thank you. And the last paragraph on page 2, carrying over into page 3, there's a lot of references like to numbers that don't include million after it. I think we need to, for the sake of the minutes and clarity, ensure million is inserted after all of those terms. It's the
Page 3.
page 2 and carrying
I see.
over into page 3. But you've got
5.2, 1.7.
5.5 projected, 7.8. You've got million in a few places, but you don't have million in other places. I think wherever the million is lacking, I think we need to insert the word million in 17.5, carrying over into 1.7, 5.2. There are at least 6 places where the million should be, or million needs to be added for clarity and editorial purposes. Beginning on the last paragraph of page 2.
Okay, so I got 4.5, 17.5. Next page 5.2, 1.7, and you said you had 5.
Going back up onto our operating expenses.
Yep,
Was 4.5,
5.5.
5.5, 7.8.
Okay, with those pen and inks, any other commentary?
With those changes, I would move to approve them with those additions.
Motion by Robinson, second by Jean. All in favor of approving minutes as inked? Say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? That carries. Item 2 would be the director's report on utility operations. Director Lindman.
Thanks, Mayor. So we had a few items on here. If you have any questions, a couple of highlighted items. The resin disposal, I think, is going to take place next week. I think that total cost for that is going to end up somewhere around $124,000. The rain barrel sales, rain barrel pickup is tonight and tomorrow night. We've sold about 300 rain barrels, and we grabbed a couple extra pallets to come into because we've had some late callers. So we can kind of sell them a la carte as well. Other than that, it's construction updates and some other items if any commissioners have any questions.
Mr. Force.
On the resin disposal, where are we on construction of the granular activated filtration system, and whether or not we might face another resin disposal before that new GA system is up and operating?
Go ahead, Scott.
Excuse me. We just sampled in April 17th. We had PFAS samples, and I should have shared the results. I apologize. PFOA at 4.3 and 4.6. No other detects in any of the other items, or PFAS, or the other 4 that EPA is going to be regulating. So we're at low numbers. I don't believe we will have to have another exchange, but we're looking at 6 months too. So.
6 months, Scott, before the GAC system is up and running?
No, I apologize. We should be up and running by October.
By October, that's what I thought.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay.
I'm losing track of time, Jim. It's going so fast.
Other comments on that? Yes, Mr. Jean.
Was that the effluent of the water, or is that's
Effluent.
effluent?
That's post-ionx treatment. So that's what we're putting into the distribution system.
The wells I don't know if you're monitoring the wells on a regular basis or not?
We haven't
Okay.
tested the wells. We haven't tested the raw water.
Okay, thank you. I do have one other comment to make for Mr. Brooks. How'd you get that net clarifier? That was very nice.
There was a request sent to me, and they wanted to highlight Wausau in the April edition of the clarifier, so we obliged them and sent them a bunch of the article along with the pictures and that.
I think
So-
it would be good for us to have a copy. I'd like to look at it that way than piecing it together. So it looked very nice, very well done. Thank you.
Absolutely. There's a few of the magazines down at the wastewater treatment plant. Be happy to give you one.
Thank you for authoring that. That was a good read. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Mr. Lindman, anything further?
Nothing.
Mr. Robbins?
I was just going to request, and while I followed most of the article, that was a highly technical one. I think it'd be helpful, given a few new commissioners, if we could have that rendered to layperson's language and a presentation to the commission. You got a little bit technical in some of the aspects of it, and I thought it was good, but I think for the general public, it would be worthwhile for them to just go through the evolution and the improvements that were all part of this last project.
Definitely. We can, do you want to do that at the next commission meeting or at some point?
I would say we put it on for next commission meeting, give you a chance to prepare for that,
Thank you.
certainly. All right, with that, then we'll put the director's report on file. Brings us to item number 3, update on lead service line replacement project from Community Infrastructure Partners, and we have Sean Aged in the house. We had a presentation placed in the packet, and we should be getting some updates on our ROEs and our, or we're going to show it up? now?
Yeah.
Okay, good.
So I sent a printed copy just because a lot of this stuff is very small in here in case you had trouble seeing it. Also, the first progress report is printed out and distributed there. So this is, this first slide here is just intended to show the team. Again, this is not a program between the city of Wausau and CIP. It's much broader than that. We have a lot of local team members doing the majority of outreach. That includes WIPS, Medical College of Wisconsin, H2N, OLA, Among American Center, LIUNA, DAR, and most recently 5-Star, which we'll get into later in the presentation. They were the selected contractor. They were the winning contractor, submitting the lowest bid. So here's an update on our outreach efforts to date. There are 5 census tracts that are eligible for replacement in the first year, which is the 2024 construction season. Within those 5 census tracts, there's about just under 2,900 eligible homes, which means a home that had the public side replaced and the private side the private service line is either unknown or known lead or galvanized. So within those 5 tracts, we began sending a letter to residents back in October after CIP was awarded, and from that one letter, 200 appointments were scheduled, and we were able to start the verification and outreach process. In November, we had our first outreach event, which was the demonstration replacement with Marathon Plumbing, and then we began our door-to-door canvassing in December. So far, we've been to almost 2,000 homes within those 5 census tracts, and we've verified 1,253 of them. 440 of those 1,253 were determined to be either lead or galvanized and eligible for replacement. And as of last week, we had 322 right of entries. I know we got another 15 today. There's only been 3 refusals so far. So the difference between the 440 verifications and the ROEs that we've collected just means we need to go and pick up the remaining ROEs. Yes.
For the layman in the room, and including myself, when you use a phrase like ROE. Could you please explain the
Yes, absolutely.
meaning of those letters? Thank you.
An ROE is a right of entry agreement, which essentially is the homeowner and the tenant providing permission to access the home and replace the lead service line. So those are the 322 that we have here as of last week. Those are actual signed right of entry documents that we have collected from residents in those 5 census tracts. I think the other point is, a lot of the communities that we're working with across the country, DC Water in particular, and what 5-Star is seeing in Denver and Detroit is a lot of times when they start construction, they only have entry agreements for about 30% of the homes on that block. And they're able to get to 80 to 90% just by saying, hey, we're going to start construction on your street. And residents start getting more and more engaged and provide access that week of construction. So we're well ahead of that 30% level as of today. So we had very positive results from the construction bids where, as I mentioned, 5-Star was the winning bidder. Initially, back last June, Wausau applied to replace 533 lines for $5.3 million. Wausau was actually awarded $5.7 million. That included additional construction contingency, and $3.6 million of that is in grants or principal forgiveness. And because of the bids coming in at the level they did, with the same bucket of money, we think we can replace going up from 533 to over 700 lines with that same $5.7 million. So that's super positive, and those prices are locked in for 3 years, so for 2024, 2025, and 2026. And now, so as we begin construction, a lot of the work that's been happening to date has been community outreach and engagement, and there's a lot of different varieties of that. One is targeted outreach. We've done a lot of door-to-door canvassing. As I mentioned, we've been to nearly 2,000 homes and inside over 1,200 of those homes. And again, there's only 5 tracts within Wausau eligible for the first year, so we can't go to every single home in Wausau because it would be too early. Those homes aren't eligible for 2024 based on DNR's requirements. We also do community outreach where we go to public events and provide multilingual materials, and there's some examples in the packet in this presentation. We do a lot of network outreach with businesses, schools, colleges, healthcare providers. Medical College of Wisconsin is one of the partners. And then a lot of public awareness using social media. Right now we're on Facebook, YouTube, and Instagram, just trying to spread awareness of the program. There's 3 stages to outreach and communication. So far, all of it has been pre-replacement because we haven't started construction, which is really educating homeowners and residents on the program, building trust, and really maximizing the outreach to maximize the right of entry agreements. Then during replacement, outreach and communication is continuous to ensure that the schedule is known and when we're going to be on their block or in their homes and replacing their lines, as well as post-replacement, providing them with water filters and any procedures that they would have to follow. So here's some outreach efforts today, and I passed out the first progress report. Again, it's really a result of just outreach, but we'll update construction when that starts in about a month or so on those monthly progress reports as well. We have lots of relationships with different property managers and homeowners, including 18 different property owners and 3 property managers. We do a lot of network outreach with H2N and some of the other outreach partners, and we're continuously attending different fairs and carnivals and other events throughout the city of Wausau and Marathon County. When we go door to door and do outreach, there's a brief survey for residents, and some of the questions is what's your main source of drinking water? More than a third of them is unfiltered tap water, so that's insightful. It's good that 80% of the residents know the harmful impacts of lead. More than half of Wausau residents that we've been to today don't have access to water filters, and that is something that the program will be providing. So these are all just data that we're gathering and collecting so we can keep the city more informed. Here's an example of this is the program website where We can schedule appointments, so a homeowner can go to the program website, pick a date and a time on when they want a verification done. So that's an alternative to door-to-door canvassing. There's also self-verification technology where they can upload a photo of the actual water line, and I'd say about 80% of the time you can tell whether or not it's lead or galvanized. There might be some instances where you can't tell from the photo, where we'd have to go and schedule an appointment in person. But we try to make it as less intrusive as possible. So, if you do have that ability to self-verify, you don't have to go into the basement and disturb the homeowner. Here are some different communication examples. As I mentioned earlier, we sent out direct mailers with the utility bill, and that led to 200 different appointments back in October. We do have multilingual materials, particularly in Spanish and Hmong for those populations, and we have a digital newsletter that goes out to anyone that subscribes. More examples of different communication. I've passed out the first monthly progress report. This will be updated on a monthly basis. It's going to have more and more construction numbers as we break ground. Here are examples of door hangers that we leave when we go to a home and the homeowner's not there. There's an initial door hanger that shows we visited you, sorry we missed you, as well as one that's we're about to break ground on your street, last opportunity. And there's also an example of a yard verification sign. So we're just trying to spread awareness in as many different ways as possible of the program. Social media is another way we're trying to engage residents. As I mentioned, we're on Facebook, YouTube, and Instagram. There's examples of Meet the Team members. Francisco is one of the outreach leads working for WIPS. And there's different flyers and different social media posts to try to bring awareness to events that were happening and just overall education of the program. In addition to social media, we have traditional media examples where we try to reach out to local, statewide, and national media outlets. One is to get, obviously, awareness of the program, but also to position Wausau as a thought leader in this space. Wausau is probably going to be the first community in Wisconsin to close their lead service line loan. Wausau also got the second largest grant funding behind Milwaukee, so Wausau really is ahead of the game in the state and nationally, so we want to continue to promote that. And then we constantly have, a roadmap of what we're doing for outreach for the next 90 days to attend different fairs and programs and connect with different businesses and schools and just ensure that there's more and more awareness of the program. If there's ever confusion or if there's ever questions, we want to be a resource to anyone in the community that we can help. A list of different upcoming events. This is just another example of how we're engaging the community. These are both local and county-based events throughout the next 4 months. Similarly, we have different marketing and PR. We have an ad in city pages. We're doing direct marketing. We're creating a YouTube video that provides education and awareness on that. It'll be posted on the programmatic website. We've also considered, even doing social media ads. We know that's very hit or miss. Sometimes it really helps. We know there's a large Facebook community in Wausau, so we're trying different things to try to promote more awareness. To date, based on the survey, 60% of residents heard about the program through door-to-door canvassing, 40% through other outlets. And now an update on the procurement and construction so far. We had our initial pre-bid meeting back in January. An invitation was sent to 150 different firms, 30 firms attended. There was about 8 firms that submitted pre-qualification. 6 of them were actually pre-qualified. We had a mandatory pre-bid meeting back in April, and we got 3 bids. It was Mid-City, 5-Star, and a team led by Van Wright. We went with the low bid. 5-Star had incredibly competitive pricing. It was $48.20 for a private side replacement and $6,000 for a full replacement with prices locked in for 3 years. And that was, about half of what the other 2 teams were. not quite half, but maybe 60% of the other two teams on the full replacement. So locking those prices in for 3 years we thought was very favorable. And again, that allows us to go from the 533 lines that we applied for to more than 700 replacements this year. In addition, the third-party verification and inspector was selected today. That was Clark Dietz. That RFQ was issued last month. They were submitted at the end of April, and a decision to move forward with them was today. And then here's a general overview of the construction schedule by neighborhood. We think conservatively, Five Star can easily do 5 replacements per day, and they could ramp up to 10 per day as well. We think that construction will start first week of June. Obviously, we don't have the loan closed with DNR. We're working every day with them to try to get that settled, but we are on track to maximize the short construction season in Wausau and replace 700 or more LSLs. So I know that was very quick, but I'm here to answer any questions that you guys have. Yes.
Good job overall. On that last construction schedule, restoration refers to what?
So that's ensuring that every homeowner's yard is put back to
I
the
see.
condition that it was in previously.
Thank you.
Yes.
Going back to your numbers, was there a combination of public versus private? Do you know the percentage if they're full
Yeah.
replacement?
Yeah, so a full replacement, the construction cost was $6,000 for full replacement. For a partial replacement, it was $4,820.
No, my question, maybe I didn't phrase it well. How many of the 333, whatever you have, is full?
No, these are all partial replacements
Oh,
for year one.
All partial replacements. But the other question, with your experience now with getting into homes, we had a projection of how many private side there was. Do you think that, based on what you're observing actually in the field, is that going to change, or do you think it's going to be about as we had projected originally?
It seems like there's a lot less from what we've seen. The initial inventory report that we were going off of last year was based on a CDM Smith report back in 2021 that estimated there was 8,000 private side lines and about 4,400 public side lines. And we're seeing about 35% of the homes that we're verifying are lead. It's hard to know about some of the other tracks, but there's whole block groups within Wausau that we're not finding any lead at all, so that's a good thing for Wausau.
That's excellent news, actually.
Yes.
Mr. Forrest?
Could we see a map next time with the tracks identified?
Yes,
I
absolutely.
mean, you say east side. I don't know
Yeah.
what part of the east side that might be.
So this is not very well zoomed in, but
Right.
this is where the verifications have been done. The gray means unverified. The green means it's not lead or galvanized. It's likely copper. Red is lead, and I think yellow is galvanized. We can show you maps of the 5 census tracts that are eligible. I can send those to the committee as well, or the commission via email. The other thing that for 2025 construction, the application's due at the end of June. So we would need to identify which areas in the city we want to expand beyond the 5 census tracts. And I think we would overlay that with where is the principal forgiveness coming from with DNR and where we think the lead is in the city.
And we'll be talking about that coming up here.
I have one other question. How many, since I worked for the city for 30 years, never thought there was a lot of galvanized. What are the numbers or percentage of that?
Do you know what you're seeing
It's definitely less than the lead. Off the top of my head, I don't know
You
the
need,
percent.
you need to go up to.
You're going to have to come up to the mic.
It's definitely less than the lead. Off the top of my head, I don't know what the percent of galvanized is. When Sean says 35% is the hit rate, that sort of includes galvanized in that. But we have some analysis I could give you separate. It'd be easy to pull out.
Yes.
Sometime back, we had concerns expressed by a resident regarding the connection is it copper that we're using?
Yes.
Primarily, to various metals inside the home, and there was concern expressed about possible difficulties or problems that would arise, and I think the individual pointed out one example of that on the west side. What is being done to identify that issue and address it if it does occur at a specific home? Is it the city inspector involved in looking at that and determining what the best course of action would be?
So that's that's what the role of the third-party inspector is to verify that everything was replaced correctly. So if there's any homes that weren't replaced correctly and we run into an issue like that, they would not sign off on that house as verified correctly. So do you know any more about the technical issues that he's talking about?
I'm not entirely sure. In general, like Sean said, we'd have an inspector be there to make sure all connections are made correctly before we leave the home. In all cases, we're just doing the copper into the home. We stop at the meter. So then the water department's going to connect the meter from the line that comes into the home to the interior plumbing. So that's our process for it. Yeah.
Typically, Jim, if there's a connection to something inside the home that we have to do, there'll be a dielectric fitting to keep that galvanic reaction, you know.
Right, and that's the word I was searching for. I
Yeah.
couldn't recall that email specifically. Thank you.
Yep.
Mr. Robinson.
Yeah.
So we have the schedule for this year, and just beginning to look at 2025 and beyond. I think we're several discussions later, both on the capital projects and on the LSL ordinance. But you indicated that we're seeing less of an impact, but how will that impact next year from a planning perspective and a capital improvement budget perspective?
So I think overall, to replace all the lead service lines in Wausau, it's going to cost less because there is less lead, right? So it's what we don't know is how much money DNR will potentially award Wausau, right? So we submitted an ITA back in October of last year for $15 million. And the intention was 1,500 lines, so it was $10,000 a line. So we know that pricing is much better than $10,000 a line now with the bids that we've received, and those are locked in for 2025. So the option is to reduce that number below 15 million or increase the 1,500 replacement number to something like 2,000 or above. We also don't know the percentage of principal forgiveness that will be awarded to Wausau versus loans, but what we do know is where certain census tracts and block groups qualify for a certain percentage of principal forgiveness. In some cases, it might be 75%, some cases it might be 100%. We don't know that there's that much principal forgiveness at the state level because we don't know how many other municipalities and utilities will be applying for it. But what we'll do is we'll overlay the map based on all of there's 6 criteria that DNR is using to determine principal forgiveness eligibility, and we'll try to maximize that principal forgiveness. But then it's up to the city at determining what the level of the ask is, right? If it's 15 million, if it's 10 million, if it's whatever that number is.
So as we look at, if I could follow up, we look at the Safe Drinking Water Act funding, and you've got that 5-year horizon with that unprecedented level of funding. And we're now 2 years into that, so we've got 3 years left. Does it pay for us to reevaluate the numbers in light of that window that's there? And I guess I'm asking a question of process. How do we position ourselves as a utility to maximize the level of funding? You had referenced the principal forgiveness versus the 0.5% loans, but how do we put ourselves in the best terms, and how might that impact some of the discussions we're having?
Yeah, so I think the way to do it is ensuring that you're what DNR calls disadvantaged communities. You're including disadvantaged communities into every application. And they do a weighted average based on how many replacements you expect to include in those disadvantaged communities and the non-disadvantaged communities. It doesn't have to be limited only to DNR's definition of disadvantage. But, you know, there's ways to do that calculation based on how many replacements you want to do. The other thing that we do know is what each census tract and each block group qualifies for in terms of principal forgiveness. We don't know that it'll be awarded, but we do know that. And with the new updated numbers, we can calculate what that looks like in terms of debt service over a 5-year period. It's 0.25%. We did that calculation for Wausau probably 6 or 7 months ago before the initial award, before we got bids in. So we can revise a projected 5-year schedule. I think the initial schedule was close to, I think it was 55% grants, 45% principal forgiveness over the 5-year period. And I think it was a little under 60 million. That number, that $60 million number is going to go down, and that principal forgiveness number could stay the same, could go down. But we can revise that and see what it looks like on terms of a debt service and then any potential, you know, impacts associated with that debt service.
I have a question. Anyone else? So on your summary of lead verification efforts, you had 1,253 with 440 hits. So are there enough homes left in that phase 1 census tract to get, do you believe, this 700? Or if we don't expend that, that can be rolled next year? How does that affect our application if we only use 3/4?
Yeah, it's a good question. So we think there's about 700 homes that we haven't been into yet that are unknown. And of those 700, if 35% of them are lead, that you're looking at maybe an additional 250. So you're right around that 700 number. To your point, if we don't spend all $5.7 million, you have 2 years to spend that money. So you can use that money in 2025 as well.
Okay, and we'll talk a little more about 2025 as we come up. Any further questions for Mr. Agid? Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Sean.
Thank you.
Okay, item number 4, discussion and possible action improving the 2025 to 2029 capital projects. And I think that's tab 4, item 4. So there's a packet item in here that has the spreadsheets on the proposed projects, has some funding and other notes on it. And Eric, did you want to highlight some of these?
Yeah, thanks, Mayor. So at the back side of this section, there's the two 11 by 17 sheets with what the drinking water and the wastewater proposed 5-year capital plan would be. And you'll see what they're what we're proposing for total capital borrowing each year. And then at the beginning of the packet, which was asked for at the last meeting, was trying to understand what the annual capability of the utility is, right, on the water and the wastewater side as far as accepting debt and what those annual payments are. And so one of the sheets after my written memo, the first one is just if the utility, the drinking water utility, were to accept the lead service line proposed loan amounts over the next 5 years, and what that cumulative annual debt payment would be over 10 years and 20 years. And the second would be if we also not only included the lead service line, but also included our proposed capital plan, as well as adding the cost of adding staff over the next several years as well, and what those annual expenditures would be. And if you look at both of those sheets, right, I feel that the rate structure that we're in right now for the water and wastewater utility is good, right? But adding in that lead service line proposed loan payments get to be a heavy strain on the water, on the drinking water division. And so, for 2024, utility rates cannot be used for that loan portion, right? So even though that's included in these calculations, that borrowing, that loan service will have to be either out of TID or other funding sources in general obligation debt. So first, does the information in the packet that the commissioners have seen, do you understand it? Do you need specific, clarification on something specific that maybe doesn't make sense to you? There's a lot.
Mr. Robinson.
Well, from the perspective of the capital plan, you're missing the presentation, the later presentation relative to the solar array panel, and how might that impact?
That's included in the debt service, if you look on that
Okay,
second
it is,
sheet.
it is
Yeah,
included, okay.
Yeah, with all the other projects,
And
yeah.
I stand corrected, thank you.
Yeah, at least right now, what we think that debt service would be, I think about 1.7 million, yeah. So as you know, every year, we're always, throughout the year, managing our conflicting priorities, right? We set a plan in June for our capital, right, for the following year. And not every year, but we end up having projects that come to the forefront because of emergent situations, because of failures, and then we have to defer, right? So our intent is to try to establish a capital plan moving forward and stay within those budget, that's approved and accepted by the commission. And so whether we have to defer certain projects and equipment in order to fit in other projects, or if bids come in high, maybe we defer that project as well. And we do that every year.
One of the things we talked about is on the lead service, the LSL replacement, and Mr. Lemon has it shown out over 5 years and then over 10 years. I think the thought process is, especially in the early years, if we can stay on this 5-year pace, well, the grant money is still high relative to the loan portion, so we've got a 2/3, 1/3 roughly right now. And if we have to shift based on the debt load to a 10-year, we could go to that, but I think, I think we agreed at some point, let's try to maximize grant money while it's still at a high ratio. And then we can talk about, what our thought process is on which of those tracks we go to. And in my estimation, if we, and if this is not the point to talk about it, let me know, Eric, I think the lead service lines, to Mr. Jean's point, this year we are not doing any city sides unless it's in conjunction with a road replacement.
Right.
But if we look at best bang for the buck, if we're looking at taking the most lead out in a single operation, it would make sense to target those city side, where we have both city side, private side. That would get us, I think, more efficient use out of our contractors. It's a cost savings for the city, other than the, and I'm not sure if the street portion is in here for costing, but the difference, I thought it was 60 or 50, 4,300, but you said 4,800, so you're talking $1,200 more to do the complete operation. It makes sense to take advantage of that efficiency. So what am I asking here for? I think we're looking for for action on Mr. Lindman's plan?
Yeah, I think just the general capital plan for the drinking water and wastewater. You know, the lead service line plan and project, right, you know, is evaluated every year. It will come back this fall again with what we, again, after further conversations in our application to the DNR as far as what 2025 we think we'll look at. And then also where that potential funding might be, you know. You know, and it kind of goes into our other items today, lead service line replacement ordinance, that would have to be in place for user rates. And so there's a lot that has to happen before the utility could take on that project from a financial standpoint.
Mr. Robinson?
So I'm going to go back to my previous question, because when I look at the actual capital plan, I'm not seeing, you've got LSL replacements, public side, and you've got 0 for borrowing. So we haven't factored that into the plan, but you have for the financing plan. I think it would be beneficial to see it in both. And then again, on the solar array, I don't see the solar array in the capital plan if it's built into the finance plan. I think that leads to confusion to others. So if we can just get that comprehensive, you know, wrap all those costs in there if we can.
Yeah, I guess in the capital plan, it wasn't my intent to have the utility pay for the solar, right? Because right now, we don't have approvals to pay. I mean, we would have a different path to take with the PSC to use water rates and things like that. Now, if that's what you want to see, we can certainly do that. But that, you know, that the solar array would have come out of, you know, general obligation and other funding. But if you want to see it in the capital plan, we can certainly put it in there.
I think my preference for transparency would be to include it, and you can look at the funding source and you can footnote or deal with it from a funding source. But if we really are incurring those capital associated with the operations of the utility or utility-related activities, it'd be nice to capture them. I know there was a discussion of using ARPA funds and others to supplement the solar array, but I think again, for transparency, it'd be nice to get a comprehensive view of what we're doing from a utility perspective. And if it relies on the Safe Drinking Water Fund loans or revenue bonds or GO bonds, I think those can be footnoted or clarified.
Okay, I can certainly add that, yeah.
Mr. Jean?
Can you briefly comment on Eller's report? I want to be sure that the excess revenue is as stated, and maybe for the benefit of everybody else.
Yeah, so what they're claiming or stating as excess revenue is really at the end of our operational budget and our capital projects, right? That is the revenue that, under our current rate structure, that the utility would have to do capital projects, pay down debt service, and on an annual basis. So for 2024, or 2023, I'm sorry, the drinking water shows in excess of 826,000. So, and that was, that's really about half of what we're going to see moving into 2024, because the new rates went in July of last year. So we didn't even get a full half year of rates. And so those are kind of the numbers we're comparing to when we run our capital debt service every year. And on the wastewater side, it's about 1.8 million. And so, and we think that will be fairly steady going through 2024 as well. And so I think both the water and the wastewater utility at this point, their excess revenue moving forward is going to be fairly close, 1.6 to 1.8 a year available for capital projects, and which, you know, kind of shows us that our rate structure is good right now. And the one thing that we want to try to do is to maintain that rate structure, do anything we can to prevent future, you know, rate cases, rate structure, and rate increases, so.
So are we able to approve this today, or do we need another addition for Mr. Robinson's request?
Well, I'll make the motion to accept it, but I want John to make sure that we have the language to demonstrate that the hell is it? I can't think of the name of it right now. The solar panels will be part of it, but footnoted, pertaining where the funding source and the LS lead service line replacement be also shown, but not necessarily part of our debt, or may be funded in another manner.
Sure.
So we have a motion to accept the capital improvement plan, or capital project plan, with the addition of the solar array notes and the other notes mentioned.
And you have to remember that everybody wants to think it's firm, but it's a plan, and it's subject to change.
Mr. Robinson?
And I would just, I can bring the experience of the county to that. When we develop our preliminary KIP, we put all the projects in there, and then you break it down into what your funding source is. But you're listing all of the projects, so you have that idea, whether it's ARPA, whether it is a highway fund, whether it's a federal grant, and others. And I think that for transparency and communicating to the council and to the public, I think it's important we show those. And
No, that's fine. I'm happy to bring it back next month with the updated sheets and stuff, as long as the commission's okay with what we're presenting right now, and we'll add those few items in, and, yeah.
I would second Commissioner Jean's motion.
You will second. Okay, so we have a motion from Jean for the capital project, second by Robinson. Further discussion? Mr. Force?
I certainly will support the motion, but, and I may be the only one in this position, I get absolutely lost in all the numbers that we are presented with. And I try to do a good job of figuring it out before the meeting, but I still get confused many times over the numbers that we're looking at and the impact on the utility and on the ratepayers. So I don't know if there are better ways of presenting this. I do recall early in my career on this board, which is 7 years now, we used to get a statement from accounting showing revenue and expenditures month by month. It was a bar chart with vertical bars showing expenditures versus revenue month by month compared to prior years. And I found that quite helpful in trying to determine the financial health of the utility. And we don't do that anymore. There may be reasons that I'm not aware of why we don't, but I'm not aware of that. I don't have the answer to the problem that I'm having, but I certainly would appreciate some way of simplifying this, either with summary sheets or with some kind of a graphic presentation that would at least help me understand it.
I will work on that for next month, Jim, both narrative as well as maybe a graphic presentation on where we're at. Okay, I will, and maybe if I get it done ahead of time, maybe I'll just share it with you and see
Okay.
if this is the right path, or maybe we'll
I
try
mean,
something
if I
else.
can figure it out, probably
Yep.
everybody else can too. Just one other question. When we say user rates, and, our report is full of that term, user rates, we're talking about money in hand, right, that we're collecting through user rates that we could use toward projects. We are not talking about new sources of new user rates, correct?
Correct.
Thank you.
Yep. Yep.
And this is treated similarly to what our CIP process is, so if the funding is not there, the list shrinks. Or it could grow. We'll see. Further comments? All right, so on item 4, the capital improvement projects, we have a motion by Jean, second by Robinson. All in favor? Any opposed? That motion carries. Item 5, discussion and update on lead service line replacement ordinance. So this is going to have an impact on planning and potential on funding. So we're going to need to really give this a good kick here today, because I think we owe it to the utility, when we owe it to the citizens to understand if we come back next month and be able to put this thing to bed, up or down, whether we have the ordinance, whether we don't. That'll give us some better planning moving forward, because it's been kind of languishing here for a couple of years, and I think we need to move on it. So I'm going to open it up. I don't know, are we having a presentation on this from legal, or has anyone?
No.
Okay.
This is just kind of, I brought from the last meeting that we talked about this, I tried to highlight some of those questions in my memo to bring those forward. And then, I think one of the biggest pieces of this, right, is the financing, the funding of it, right? And there's questions on whether at some point there's going to be a special assessment to homeowners, right? And then if there is, what that is. Is it a percentage? Is it a flat rate? Is it paid back over 5 years? Is it deferred to other options? The city and the utility has a lot of different options, and so we can detail those out in this lead service line ordinance. We could keep it more general to where, pass an ordinance that, private sides will be replaced or mandated for replacement as funding is available. So that I think, and then structure the funding outside of the ordinance. So if it changes from time to time, the entire ordinance doesn't. I'm not quite sure where the commission is on making that decision to move this forward.
Mr. Robinson.
So Eric, and I appreciate that background, but one of the concerns that I had when I was reading through the proposed ordinance is that we've
Yep.
got the ordinance, and then we've got our KIP process, our work with KIP. And there seems to be disconnects relative to processes and timelines. And as we go through, if we're dealing with that 500, 700, 1,500, 2,000 a year, we build in there on the customer side some processes where we notify, and they've got 30 days to get 2 bids, and we take the lower bid, which is not the process that we're using. So how would we reconcile the difference between our current plan and the ordinance? And do we need to somehow build some opportunity to move ahead with a plan into the ordinance that is not in its current form? And I would look to legal, is there an off-ramp?
Yeah, I mean, you could put in either or, you could leave it more general, and because there are options, right, with funding as long as it's available, right? We could run the funding like we used to and have the homeowners hire their own private plumbers, right? And they're just kind of on their own. Or we can do what we're doing now and contract that work through the city, right? And administer that and then work with the homeowners, but the city or CIP in this case, is taking on the risk for the homeowners, right? And all the responsibility for making sure that work is done. We set a ordinance in place, and if we try to get into too many details, right, then my fear is then we might be coming back frequently to change it year to year or something. So I think in certain instances, if we want to more generalize that and how the project is going to be delivered, then that might be a benefit, right? Like, rather than trying to iron out all those specifics in here. And keep in mind, that service line ordinance kind of has evolved over a few years, and we've pulled in other municipalities and how they're doing it, and now we're kind of on a path that nobody else is doing, right? And so I would agree with you, John, that we should try to mesh those or make it general enough to where if the city moves in one direction or another, the lead service line ordinance stays in place.
And
Mr. Robinson.
we heard the presentation where we had 3 refusals of entry, and, you know, how do we deal with those? And obviously, there's a provision, but we're sort of we are moving down a different path, and I would just hope that we would have potentially that tiered approach within the ordinance. If we go with a public and customer side, city-sponsored plan, the following sections are not applicable. If we don't, then you would have that there. But I think it's important for us to have the mandatory ordinances, sort of that incentive, or that you've got a carrot and a stick, and the carrot is you're looking at the funding. The stick is if you don't, you still have to do it. If you don't jump in, you still have to do it. So the incentive is to get them into the program.
So what I heard from that is you'd like provisions for both types of the installation, like incorporated in the ordinance, right? So that we're covered either way, however that delivery method happens.
Yes, I would not want to open us up to a potential criticism, lawsuit, or others from a private party that said, I had the right to go out to 2 contractors and you imposed one on me. I want to just make sure we minimize our potential conflicts, and I think legal could perhaps work on that.
And then, okay, I think we can work on that section, and I think the big one is the funding. How detailed do you want to get in on the funding? Some of them are very general, you know, as funding is available, you know, there's some language in the ordinance right now as well as, you know, kind of that general language.
Well, the ordinance gives you a 7-year period in which to do the connection, but we're in a 5-year plan. So I think there's some reconciliation that we'll have to do between the two. But I think you're right. If you've got 3 years of additional funding, 3 additional intent to apply opportunities with the Safe Drinking Water Act on funding on steroids, I will put it, because
Yeah.
and you don't know what will happen beyond that. Much of that depends on who's in control of Congress and the Oval Office, and where they go from there. But we've got that 3-year window going forward, so we can look at that 3-year window, and I think in our planning we should be aware of that 3-year window. But I'm comfortable with the ordinance as long as we've got that on-off ramp.
Okay. So we'll keep the funding piece general, because that decision will be made year to year based on.
Right.
Yeah, okay,
And we don't know what the success of our ITAs will be, the intent to apply.
that's correct.
Well, if you took a look at what we know our cost is going to be the next 5 years, if it stays on that same trajectory,
Right.
one third of an installation for a homeowner could be $1,500 over 5 years.
Yeah.
So that's on a total $6,000 replacement, that's a pretty good deal. $300 a year if it's 5 years. But residents are going to want to know if that's the route we're going, or if it's going to be funded some other way. We can't keep them in the dark forever. Plus, if we're going to go to this plan next year, that we hit more city sites, we are not allowed to do partial replacements. So how do we handle that? We're going to have more city side that will have to have the complete line replaced. Further comments?
You know, Tegan, I don't know if I missed anything, Tegan. You know, you and I have gone over this a few times, and I think those were the couple of big ones that we had.
Yeah, I think one question in your memo that you had pointed out that I think we should probably get an answer on is bullet point number 3, who's responsible for setting the policy on how private LSLs are to be paid. So is that, because I think when Eric and I had discussed this, Eric, we talked about ultimately the council is going to be making the final decision on this ordinance. But how do they want this, how do you guys want this structured? Do you want like a paragraph kind of starting the ordinance off with history of funding and types of available funding, and that there are multiple options for funding, and then go through different paragraphs for what's going to happen given those specific scenarios? I think that's what you had said, Mr. Robinson. Is that correct? An accurate reflection of what you would like that to say?
Go ahead.
Well, I'm not sure exactly what I'm looking for. I'll know it when I see it. You know, it's kind of like,
Okay.
like
So
that.
that's kind of hard.
I know.
That's not like direction.
So I think what we need to do is have a process. The ordinance does a few things. It lays down the framework under which we will operate from a legal perspective. And so what I'd like to do is make sure that we can deal with the plan, with the KIP plan, as well as our proposed mandatory connection ordinance.
Okay.
And so
And
there-
just so I'm clear,
so-
when you say a KIP plan, is that the CIP?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Yes. So we have to somehow build that in there. I think what we can do is perhaps in the financing is expand, you know, we say that it's subject to available funding through the city, state, local government, and we could perhaps expand that to include specialists. You know, I think we do reference assessments, special assessments in there, but make sure that that's there as a tool, and we'll really have to deal with this on an annual basis. So as we get the KIP plan in, is how they're going to address that 700, 1,500, and 2,000, depending upon the year. We'll need to then take a look at where that fits and what the funding opportunities are based upon resources that are available externally. We run the risk of being inconsistent in application, because one year we may have safe drinking water funds and loan forgiveness, principal forgiveness, and other years we may not, which could impact the cost of it. And then we get into the issue, ultimately, the question behind the ordinance is, if we adopt it, will we then put the customer side on the rates? And the only way we can do that is through having the ordinance. And that may beg for a different discussion, but I don't know if what the drop dead date is for having those provisions in the ordinance, if we can be fluid and address those as we encounter them.
So I think that kind of makes, from what you're saying, is the language that you want in the statute isn't going to be, it's not going to cover all of your bases, basically. Like, I'm concerned that what you're requesting is that we're just going to have a super vague section in the ordinance about financing, and that it's just kind of all up in the air. If you would like, I can send you multiple copies of what other jurisdictions are doing. So the one that we put in here was it was similar to what Sheboygan had done, and there are other municipalities that do have ordinances in place. And if you want, I can send you some copies of those, and you can maybe perhaps give me some guidance which one you prefer and why.
Or could we put in to the ordinance, and I'm asking this, a provision for a financing plan to be developed on an annual basis by the council that would be subject to implementation under the ordinance? And then you could then look at the funding sources as sort of that trigger. Have the plan be a prospective planning document that would be built into the ordinance and drive it. So you wouldn't have to revisit the ordinance every year, but rather through adoption of the plan. And I don't know what the legal footing of that would be, but would that be an option?
I think we can make that work. Yeah.
But just to clarify your question, are you saying we would do something differently with the ordinance depending on the funding? I mean, other than speeding up or slowing down the process, or are you saying we would do something different, mandate versus non-mandate? Go ahead.
Well, I think you would still have the mandatory connection ordinance. And the question would be is when is it applicable? So you're doing the public side replacement, you have to do it. On the private side, or the customer side, you've got to do it within that 5-year period of time. The trigger mechanism, so you would have that 2-tier track. The only reason I would leave the current language in is because there's no certainty of funding going forward. But if we go with the capital improvement projects, the plan, it could be possible if there's no impact financially to the customer side of the equation, and we would need to be able to recognize that you don't want 2 bids, you don't need the 30-day notice, you don't need other things. So have that track where you can proceed down the KIP process versus the non-KIP process. And then through the plan, if we could have the financing plan, that can drive the ordinances, which one you're going, and you can, within there, you've got the available resources, and that plan would be, probably need to be approved by the commission and the council because of the potential impacts to other funding sources and revenue streams.
So do we need to have this done by October, or is that not a real number? It's October, so we need to get this back to council by
Yeah,
July?
right, Sean, for the next years, it has to be done by October for the following year's ITA.
2026 ITA is October of this year.
Right, the 2026 ITA, yeah, we would need it done for that year and their funding request, yep.
Further comment, Mr. Force?
Thank you, Mayor. Eric, is dispute resolution covered adequately in this document?
I'll leave that up to the legal team. Those I always get lost in.
I mean, I'm looking at 1366-120 penalties and 1366-130. I don't see anything relating to negotiation with an obstinate customer, and maybe that doesn't belong in here. I'd just like some guidance on that.
So are you talking about the authority to discontinue services?
That's the only,
Okay.
that's the
So
only
it's-
place I see any.
Yeah, so it's my understanding that the PSC is going to require a section regarding discontinuation of water services if we want to use rate-paying funds to pay for that service. So this was just, as you can probably see from the comments, this is just kind of a starting point to make it based off of what information I had received in previous meetings and what people had commented on. And so I had amended the language to this based off of based off the discussion that had been had in previous meetings. And this is kind of what from what you said in the meetings, this is what I had assumed kind of covered what you were requesting. It was kind of a soft discontinuation as opposed to a hard discontinuation. Just kind of giving the city an alternative to get compliance, which is required by the PSC. So I think it's adequate, but if you want something different, I'm happy to provide that for you. If you can give me some direction on what you're looking for that language to say.
Well, I would just refer to Eric. If you have a customer who's refusing to comply, does this document give you the guidance that you need to move forward?
I would say it does, like.
Then
when-
that's the test.
Yeah,
Okay.
And would that be work we could then have at the next meeting here to look at in a month?
I can have it done by the next meeting.
Okay. Any further discussion on that?
Good luck.
Thank you.
Thank you, Tegan.
Thanks, Steve.
Yep.
Yeah.
All right, moving on to item number 6, discussion and possible action. Approving next steps for a proposed solar array for the drinking water treatment facility. And I think we have Alder Chad Henke and Sam Miller here to talk to that.
Hello.
Good afternoon.
So I put together a PowerPoint, which we have on the screen. I don't think it made the packet, but I tried to put a broad brush on this very dense report and kind of show where the Solar Array Task Force got its thoughts from and how we came to the decision we ended up coming to. So we'll start. So the Solar Array Task Force, or the Task Force history, we started meeting this time last year. The members are myself, John Robinson, Paul, Susan, and Jay, who are all here today. And the goal of our task force was to make a recommendation on what to do with that property just to the east of the new water plant. There was talks of larger solar arrays going in there before and a lot of discussion around that. And we took a year to get a lot of input and come to a recommendation that that more people are happy with. So part one of our task force, we collected background information on solar in general, the effectiveness, life cycles, new technologies. We also looked at utility costs and needs, future energy rate increases, and funding available for solar projects from federal and state levels. Part two, we developed options, came up with sizes, configurations. That's where we started getting costs together, and took that to the public and got feedback from them on what they felt was the best option. And then we moved on to part three. We evaluated all those options with the public input, looked at long-term, short-term effectiveness, costs, implementability, and then that's from the community presentation, that last line there. But ran it by and got any more information from the community before we came to you guys. So we're going to look at options we reviewed by the committee. Then the last couple slides are what the committee recommended. Again, that Q&A was from the public input. And I put that note at the bottom there because multiple times I've looked for this packet and it has a lot of information in it. So I wanted to put it in a place where we could all find it. If you go to the Solar Array Task Force packet on April 18th, 2024, this packet is in there. And I just want to make that more obvious to everyone. So scenario one, initially, I think we liked the number 1, so we thought, let's look at what a 1 megawatt installation would look like there. It would estimated it would produce 1.9 million kilowatt hours. If you look at the packet, that's about 72% of the annual electric bill for the utility. The installation cost was 4.2 million. Going through these different scenarios, we used different annual electricity cost increases. We started at an annual increase of 3%, and we ran it at 3%, 5%, 7%. Estimated payback period for this at the 3% mark was 19.9 years. If electricity increased 7% annually, it fell to 15.3 years. Those initial numbers were using the current way that the water utility runs. Right now, the water utility, there's heat maps in the back of that packet, the water utility runs mainly at night now, avoid off-peak demand. If we have a bunch of solar next to it, it would make sense to maybe run during the day and use some of that solar immediately at the plant. So we're not selling power back to the utility as often, and we're using it all on site. So with some scenarios optimizing the water plant, we were able to get that payback period down to 15.5 years at a 3% annual increase. And if electricity increases at 7%, it fell all the way to 12.4 years. This scenario uses the maximum space to the east side of the water plant. So that was one pro for it. While the contractors were running the numbers on this, we had set a goal early on to have a 10-year rate of return. And the contractors crunched some numbers and came up with this 720 kilowatt, which reached the best payback period for the utility. It produces 1.19 million kilowatt hours, so that's 800,000 watt hours less than the 1 megawatt per year. The installation cost goes down to 2.57 million. And then again, using the 3 to 7% annual electricity increase, the payback period is 19.3 years to 15 years. Then again, optimizing the way the water plant runs and when the water plant runs, you were able to get that number down 12.9 to 10.9 years. Again, this was found by the contractor or by the consultant when we had them run the numbers, and it actually gave us our best initial rate of return on our payment, on our initial payment. And then scenario 2, again, a 1 megawatt unit, 4.2 million, real similar to scenario 1. The downside to this is it shifts the whole panel or the whole array to the north. This pulls it away from Tierney Avenue and away from the trees on Bugby Avenue and puts it more onto the water plant. The issue is it sits on both the city of Wausau and the town of Maine, so we would have to work with the town of Maine to get their approval on any project we did there. And they just recently passed a solar ordinance, so there's a process to do that, I'm sure. But that was a deterrent for us. And then scenario 3, we wanted to completely hide the array and move it all the way to the north side. Again, comparing apple to apples, it's a 1 megawatt unit. The installation cost there is 8.5 million. The main reason for doubling the cost is the array sits so far away from the water plant, so you have longer cable runs, bigger wire sizes, increased site prep, increased roads that need to go to these panels to maintain them. And so those are the cons for that one. So the committee took 3 factors into account when we started making a final decision. The factor 1 is the city's strategic plan and mission statement. So a year ago, I believe, we passed the city strategic plan. One of the chapters was called Innovative Public Services, and one of the objectable items on there was invest in solutions to ensure environmental sustainability for generations to come, which I feel the solar does. Another chapter was strong regional alliances. One of the objectable items in there was to support and lead in green and eco-friendly efforts and initiatives for a cleaner, healthier, and sustainable environment. And then the mission statement, which is in the daily or in the newsletter, has that promote and enhance our living environment. And I felt like we felt that this fit into there pretty well. So as opposed to just leaving the field there or putting something else there, residential or other things, we felt that it would be great to meet a lot of these city plans and statements and use it for a solar array. Factor 2 was the financial and resiliency. The committee set a goal early on. We'd like to see 10-year payback on the initial investment. The last scenario, I think, just got down to 10.9, touched close to it. We'd like to pay for the installation without affecting the water utility rates or the levy rates. So we're going to, we have a $800,000 request in for ARPA, so we'll be presenting this to finance next week. And so that's the goal there. We believe it can be done. And then another big one was the resiliency, make the water plant less dependent on the electric utility. If something happens to the utility during the day, we could still pump water and maybe fill up our towers and get a little bit of water out to people. And just be more self-sufficient. And then factor 3 was a big one. We had a lot of community, was to get community acceptance. We had a lot of community input sessions. I bulleted the biggest feedbacks we got right here. No trees in the forest area north of Bugby Avenue were to be removed. A berm will be built along Tierney Road to limit street view. There was a lot of talk of establishing prairies and wanting to keep the natural tall grass in that area. So we had some prairie experts come in and give us some once-overs on what could be done there. Construction, we'd like to base it at the water plant to limit interference from Tierney Road. I imagine the water or the array would sit nearest to the water plant, just shorter wire runs, shorter travel distances. Then after construction, if we needed an access road to go across the north side of there or to get to Tierney Road for any reasons, it was brought up that it'd be nice to connect that on the northern end of Tierney Road near that northern well house. And then again, a lot of feedback of no increase to the water utility bills or the levy rates. So our final recommendation was scenario 1, alternate. Factor 1, it uses the property for a green and eco-friendly purpose. Factor 2, uses the property to build resiliency into the water plant. Also gives the best return on our investment. And then factor 3, meets the surrounding community's concerns. We also would like to, when this gets bid out, make sure we leave thoughts for any battery technology that may change in the next 10 years. Make sure that we're always thinking about that as a possibility. And newer technology in panels even, smaller panels, bigger panels, more efficient panels, more panels in general. So that was part of the motion that we finalized. And then again, this is just the beginning. We passed a motion looking into the future. So we need to plan for additional electrical generation to be installed if and when that becomes available. Make sure we plan for energy storage installations. That will just help with the resiliency. If we could ever get to the point where we just completely cut off from the grid, that would be awesome. And then always keep in mind the existing environment and the surrounding community. So that's kind of all I had. And we'll take your questions.
Questions for the solar array? Go ahead, Mr. Force.
Excellent, Chad, and Task Force, thank you. We touched on this subject a year or two ago, and we actually failed to get proper community input. Our communications were very weak. This is much better. One of the issues that I recall was the berm, and I think at the time the berm proposed was pretty shallow. Are you talking about a berm that will actually prevent sight lines from going from the street or from the residences on the street into the solar field? Will it be tall enough to screen that? Is that your idea of a berm?
Yes, and multiple times heights of the berm were brought up, and I know 6 feet was kind of about the borderline of as low as we felt comfortable going. So anywhere from 6 feet to more would
Okay, thank you.
it made people comfortable.
Mr. Jean?
I think I know which I know it's scenario one. Is it the last one? So define what the production, kilowatt production and the projected cost?
The one that we went with
Yes.
was scenario one alternate. Yes, the last one. Yep. So yeah, it's this is installed cost was 2.5 million. Yeah. I will say going through this, I think I had 4 or 5 different contractors and consultants reach out to me over time. We had other people also run numbers on this. There was a group that felt they could get the 10% American-made rebate. It made me feel really good that their numbers came out right about 2.4, 2.5 million. I have those presentations. We can share them with you. But their rate of returns were better because they were able to get an extra 10% off of it. I had another contractor verbally tell me they're doing a very similar install, 1 megawatt install. Right here it says the installation cost, and they break it down to dollars per watt. And this one is 2.94. They're doing a project in Wisconsin here, and he says they're down closer to 2. So I mean, I have a feeling this could get really competitively bid and only help us.
So on that thought, is the price difference significant enough to not take 2 bids on, say, scenario 1 and scenario 1 alternate?
I think these were just numbers to help us with our recommendation. What our recommendation would be to go out to bid for something about the size of scenario 1 or scenario 1 alternate, the 750 kilowatt array, and see what comes back from that.
Mr. Robinson?
Let me try to answer your question a little bit differently. I think we struggle as a task force with trying to look at optimizing the production of solar power for the facility and not selling it back to the grid, because when you get into that, the grid price, the NatureWise program from WPS is not conducive to, you pay a higher rate to WPS, therefore the scaling down. But there was also that issue of neighborhood and community acceptance. If you get into a larger array, the potential for needing to take down trees and other things in the neighborhood was there. But again, we tried to optimize the sizing to the site and in not to give back to the grid, but rather focus on internal use as much as we could. And while you can do that, there are, with absent batteries and other things, you could drive up your cost of electricity through WPS.
It's not a moneymaker to generate and sell back, is what you're saying. But is scenario 1, was it acceptable to the neighborhood? What I'm getting at there is if it comes in a lot less than we expected, that would change this payback period.
I believe as long as none of the trees along Bugby, maybe Paul could answer that a little bit better. He lives right across the street, so and then as long as the berm was there, I think it was.
I agree with what Chad is saying. I think it was just critically important that we maintain the trees along Bugby Avenue and that we can build the berm along Tierney Road. I think if those 2 things are met, that goes a long way with the community.
I also think this is something that's scalable. So I mean, if we start smaller, take a little bit of bites afterwards, then and leave room for future expansion. This is something where you could add a row every 5 years. And honestly, then you're spacing out when your panels are going to fail too, so you don't have
Okay.
200 panels failing all at once. You got 100 failing, and then 5 years later, you're going to have failing, reaching end of life. So that's why we kind of settled on the recommendation size that we did, is start there and go on.
Okay, other questions? Mr. Force?
I think Joe was first.
Mr. Jean?
I just wanted to know what the projected next steps are and when we would think that we would have construction or put in service.
Eric, do you want to?
I can take that, I guess. There's a couple different things, right? If the project were to move forward, we would definitely be pursuing funding, right? Other funding, we'd start working with WPS on interconnect agreements. We'd be doing all that. We'd be doing some more designs and some layouts. And I think, even with the ARPA funding, right, that would have to be obligated before the end of '24 in a contract. So maybe we would do a contract this year, establish it, and then maybe do a late '25, '26 construction timeframe. I guess that was kind of the thought process. And that would give us time to pursue additional, DOE grants, Inflation Reduction Act grants and stuff through '25 to help fund the project while we have something under contract. And then if there's any delay in panels or equipment or anything like that, we could all get that in place as well. So.
I also think that if we use any ARPA funding here, this is a project that we could bid out and have all the costs sitting there. And if other ARPA projects fall behind because of DNR requirements or restrictions that come about, this is one that we could probably sign a contract on really quickly and then have the install like Eric mentioned.
Mr. Force?
I really enjoyed your Factor 1 discussion, point 4. The 2.4 is investing in solutions to ensure environmental sustainability, support and lead in green and eco-friendly efforts. Oftentimes, these projects get evaluated on payback only, and I've been saying all along, I hope that is not the only factor that we use to evaluate. I think it's very important that we take advantage of the opportunity to demonstrate an ecologically and environmentally friendly project here and put the city on the map as supporting green energy. So I think that's an important factor. I just want to make sure that's in the record.
Go ahead, Mr.
Maybe Sam was with QSTN and he ran all the technical information that's in the packet and stuff. And I think it's important for, us to understand that this project is really a long-term cost savings project for the utility and the ratepayers, right? This isn't something that we're looking at, in the short term, but this is something to help mitigate future rate increases as we move forward. And so, Sam had put some dollars to what we could potentially be saving on an annual basis and cumulative. And if you have specific questions, I'm sure Sam would be willing to come up and talk about that. But I think, we look at the payback, like you said, Jim, and it's 12 years or 13 years or things like that. But it actually, if this could be net neutral on the budget, right? Doesn't affect rates, the project can move forward, and over time, it helps reduce our operation costs. That's a win-win for all the users in the city, so.
I would entertain a motion, or do we have a question for, you're reaching? Robinson, no?
I'm reaching to make the motion.
I would entertain a motion to take the next steps and present this to council, or are we presenting it to finance first?
I think we would look at figuring out a proposed scope for next, steps for design moving forward, as well as kind of a timeline for the project as a whole, from planning, design, bidding, construction,
Okay.
and that would cost some money, but I think within the budget that the commission approved a couple of years ago with solar, we have some money left, so, yeah.
So, Mr. Robinson, you have a
I would move to accept the recommendation of the Solar Array Task Force and direct appropriate staff to prepare the necessary presentations relative to the next step on implementing the plan.
And a second by Mr. Jean. So we have a motion by Mr. Robinson to accept and move to the next steps of the proposed solar array drinking water treatment facility, second by Jean. Any further discussion? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay.
I'll just make one last note. We are going before finance to help with that ARPA funding next Tuesday. And yeah, so if you want to hear the presentation again or have any more questions, you can find me there.
Good luck with that. Thank you.
Thanks, Chad. I'd like to thank the members of the task force as well for your time over the last year. Thank you.
All right, item number 7, discussion and possible action approving a budget for additional staffing as recommended in the packet.
So under the budget item, I had outlined potentially what that impact from staffing would be, as well as put in the Ellers information. And both the water and the wastewater utility have capacity to add staff. And so I'd like the support from the commission on that from a budgetary standpoint, and move that along to the HR committee for consideration in council. We would propose adding 2 staff at the wastewater facility this year and 1 at the drinking water facility this year.
Mr. Robinson.
Well, Eric, I guess my concern is, we've got a plan over the next three years. So we're looking at, again, the 1 in the water this year, 2 more next year, and then in wastewater, you're 2 this year, 3, or 1 more next year, and then or 3 next, or 1 more next year, and then 2 more the year after that, to the point where we're getting at about almost $700,000 of annual cost, and we're playing the excess revenue for capital projects and operations. Not that I'm against it, but have we really thought through on a long-term basis the implications? You've got some capacity within water for rates, you've got capacity within wastewater for rates, you've got the pilot discussions that are taking place, but I just want to make sure that we're factoring in all cost and all impacts. And do you, in 2025, when you've got that $700,000 add-on, again, 256 for water, 500 or 418 for wastewater, can we absorb that without rate increases?
Yeah, again, that's why we're not adding all the staff that's recommended at once, right? I think that this will be evaluated on an annual basis as operations continue. To your point, the GAC doesn't go online until this fall, and so we will be evaluating our staffing and requirements at that time as well. But, I am comfortable with, I think one of the biggest things was our user rates established. Are they going to satisfy what we need moving forward, right, at this point in time? And I'm satisfied after what Ellers has put together that I'm comfortable. And when I look at our capital projects, when I look at other things that we have to do, I look at the absolute need at the utilities for additional staff. I mean, Ben and Scott went through and tried to identify what hours we have available from staff and then what hours we need. And we don't have enough hours, right? When we're just looking at straight hours. And that really doesn't take into account our emergent situations and things like that arise. And so I think one of our high priorities, a critical priority right now, is to begin the process of adding staff on a slow basis and evaluating and how that affects our operations and improves it with efficiencies.
Mr. Robinson?
So is the request for us today just for the 3 positions? So
Yeah.
we're,
And I think it's really just that you're okay with, utilizing utility funds. I mean, the final approvals will go to HR and council, right? Because we're actually increasing staff within the city. So I feel there's plenty of information here to support that the utility has the capacity within our rate structure to support these 3 staff. Yeah.
Go ahead, Mr. Robinson.
well, just for clarification, while you have identified the cost in 2024 of 80,007 for the water and 218,000 for the wastewater, those would be annualized costs, and we wouldn't be incurring all of those because you're not going to fill the position for the entire year. So the
Right.
impact on this year's budget would be prorated based upon start dates.
It would be, yeah.
So
Yeah.
with that in mind, I would move that we authorize or recommend to the Human Resources Committee the filling of 1 position in the water division and 2 in the wastewater division in 2024.
A motion by Robinson to approve the addition of 1 wastewater and 2 wastewater and 1 water treatment personnel. Second by Jean. And further discussion, Mr. Jean.
I couldn't find it now when I'm glancing through the report. Do we have 32 employees in the utilities at this time? They'll go to-
Combined.
Is it? I thought I saw it, but I wasn't, and that sounds right.
18 at water and 14 or 13? And 18 at water, right?
So there's 32.
32.
So we're going, this authorization would allow us to go to 35.
Correct.
Correct.
Just so everybody doesn't know this, we were at one time 50, over 50. And then John was asking, when we automated, we went down to roughly this 30, low 30 number.
Okay.
But we're automated now, but if you look at the wastewater and certainly at the water too, drinking water, those are pretty high test facilities. And I can understand why we need the staff, and there's other areas that they need to staff out in the sewer collection and out in the water distribution. So I'm fully supportive.
Well, and I would reiterate, this is why, this isn't a plan to get all 3 of them. We're just, all the recommended, because we're going to have to take this year by year. So right now, we're looking at the smaller bite. We're going to have an increase in line locates for some of the lead service line we're going to have this year. And then talking to Ben and Scott, I think they can use these guys, and we'll see where it goes. I mean, the budget's going to be the driver here, and obviously we don't have an appetite for raising rates.
Right.
Further discussion. All those in favor of adding the staffing as recommended, say aye. Aye. Any opposed? No opposed?
Mr. Mayor, I had a question.
Mr. Forrest.
At the last meeting, I asked about this cost for locates, and I believe the response I got was, well, you should talk to the legislature. I have not investigated the meaning behind that remark, but looking at this, once again, we see more than doubling the number of estimated hours that our staff is going to be asked to spend on this. The estimate in the explanation is at 2425. Those hours will go up substantially with the Frontier Mastic Boring Project. Is it worth our time to raise this issue with Mr. Snyder or the legislature as a whole and see what, if there's any remedy? I assume other utilities are facing the same issue. I mean, should we bring this up or just go with it?
Well, statutorily, well, I'll turn that over to Scott, but yes, if it's a burden and they're willing to give us some relief, we can carry that water. Who wants that?
I guess it would be a help, right? If we could have some kind of relief with resources required to do this, but it would take an active legislature to change that.
I understand that, but my feeling is they're totally unaware of the issue at this moment. That would be my guess.
I don't know that they're unaware of it. I just think it's a challenge that nobody really knows the answer to. So we're required as a utility to maintain our items and make other companies aware of where our items are at while they're working around them. If we don't have to do the work, but we're just going to be responsible for damages if they occur if we don't have it marked.
I'm aware of that, not contesting that. I'm just looking at the cost.
Well, I definitely, I mean, from my point, Jim, yeah, it definitely, I mean, there's a few other things with the legislatures that I have brought up as well. You know, I think trying to be able to figure out how you would be able to generate a revenue, you know, to help cover some of your costs with locating utilities. Again, I don't know what that answer is, but I think the more often we bring that up and how burdensome it truly is, I think, you know, may be a benefit. So I'm certainly willing to bring it up next time I see Snyder or any of the other legislators, you know.
Well, that's one approach, but maybe drafting a letter from this commission to the legislature, directing it through our local representatives and pointing out the cost factor. And the point I made in the previous meeting is the folks who can raise the number are the private entities who could be asked to pay more than they're currently paying to cover our costs. Unless I'm out of bounds, I think that's a good approach.
We will take that under advisement, and I'll definitely entertain a letter if it can make sense of it. I can do that. Just to reiterate our vote on that, so that was a 4-0 vote. You weren't dissenting there. No. Okay. Sorry. Thank you. And then item number 8, discussion on wastewater PFAS sampling results. Ben.
Yes, as I mentioned, probably the easiest item to look at is a spreadsheet that I developed. It contains the 6 months of PFAS sampling, and it includes the March sampling to date. That concludes the 6 months of testing that the commission had requested. And as you can see, our influent PFAS, that is something at this point we can't control without source reduction, which will be coming hopefully midsummer. We'll put something together and start doing some testing in that. As far as the effluent, there are proposed numbers out there by the Wisconsin DNR EPA. They're highlighted on the top of the spreadsheet. As you can see, March's PFOS is actually quite a bit lower than the standard 8 nanograms per liter parts per trillion. On the biosolids, we're looking at a combination of PFAS and PFOS, and the combination total was 6.91, well below the course of action of 20 nanograms per liter, or micrograms per liter, or kilogram, excuse me.
So we're good there. So no further action required. Would you recommend we roll this into a director's report? We can take it off from the standard line item?
That would be my recommendation at this point, but
Mr.
it's up to
Robinson.
the commission.
So with the upcoming renewal of the WPDS permit, what is a sampling frequency that you're hearing is being imposed on the new permits?
It'll be once per month for 2 years, and then they form their P99 study, and from that, they set the limits in that. I don't know if there's going to be a TMDL, being that we discharge in the Wisconsin River. That's to be said yet, so.
Are you hearing any discussion on a TMDL, given the fact that we've got those background?
Loose discussion, nothing solid at this point.
Total maximum daily limit is a TMDL. And
Correct.
we
My
could-
apologies for the acronym. So,
Thanks for the acronym explanation.
you're welcome.
Any further discussion on the PFAS sampling from wastewater? On to number 9, last item here, discussion of possible action approving the purchase of a truck chassis that will be converted into a tanker truck used for collection system flushing maintenance. And I understand we've got a potential good deal on a truck that we'd like to take advantage of, and I'll let Eric explain that, I think.
I'll let Ben do
Or
the
did-
details. Yeah.
Sure, I'd be
Mr.
happy
Brooks,
to.
go ahead.
So currently, we have our flush truck is a 1,200 gallon capacity volume, and it's an older vehicle that should go down the road, per se, to the government auction. Scott was kind enough to give us his old tanker, which is a 3,000 gallon volume tanker. And we would like to purchase a vehicle that can, or a truck chassis that would hold this 3,000 gallon tank. It would be more efficient out on the field. The crew wouldn't have to come back and refill often. They could stay out in the field longer. We have Brad Wentland, from one of the supervisors at the wastewater treatment plant, has actually did a little research and has found 2 vehicles. They're used. Both are right around that $20,000 range. We're looking at, for accessories to make this project complete, we're looking at an additional $7,000, so approximately $27,000 total. Quite a savings from new purchase price. You're looking anywhere upwards of $200,000 for a brand-new vehicle. This vehicle, the flush truck could be used, wastewater could use it. This would mainly be used by the collections crew, and wastewater could use it for low-flowing lift stations if we did pump maintenance, and we could fill up the manhole quicker and that. And we could probably find a home for the old equipment, old truck, and repurpose it elsewhere, as any other departments have the need for it.
Thank you, Mr. Brooks. Mr. Force?
I move that we move ahead with this project and accept the recommendation from Mr. Brooks. I'm not going to decide which is which here, but it seems like you've got a lot more miles for not very much money with the 2010 International.
Correct.
But I would just move we accept your judgment and we approve the expenditure for this new truck and chassis.
Thank you.
Motion from Mr. Force, second from Mr. Jean. Questions? Further discussion?
Do we need to pick one?
It depends on the availability yet, so we need to check in on that. We proposed, or we brought forward two trucks that are actually available. So if they're still available, one might be, one might not be. So obviously, option 1 is the better with the less miles. So that's more than likely to be the one we go after.
Mr. Robinson, were you thinking we would put an upper limit on this? Because if the third option comes up, that's twice his price, we probably wouldn't want to entertain that without coming back.
I would move to amend not to exceed 27,000.
Perfect.
Okay, so we have a motion to purchase a truck chassis for not more than $27,000 Mr. Jean, you would second, and then the added cost for the tank and pump unit installation was roughly 7,000. So with a motion and a second, any further discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? That motion carries. Last item is adjournment. I'd entertain a motion to adjourn. Mr. Jean and Mr. Robinson seconds. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? See you at 4:30. Thank you.